the top on how much personal information. And for this audience, for this time frame, I wanted to talk about the gaps in your spatial thinking. And for those of you who are new to GIS, new to mapping, new to spatial thinking, of course there's a gap. You've never done it before. You've done limited exposure to it. But we're all spatial creatures. We understand space pretty early. You understand as a child how to get from here to there. I have the joy of working in an organization that allows me, my team, the colleagues I work with, we work on maps all the time. We use the map as an organizing principle. We talk about what is the purpose of this map, and we want each map to be apparent in its purpose, even if it's a simple purpose. And from this, you can see a very simple purpose. This is population within 1/4 mile of a railroad. What color am I talking about here? Which color is within 1/4 mile? Red. Those of you who said red, +1 point. Another example, a map of the IRS data showing population migration to California. Big old table of data, big, ugly, nasty, complex table that we didn't trust at first, and then all of a sudden we saw a blog by our colleague about how to build these types of flow lines, and suddenly there's an idea born. So how does that happen? And I started to realize the way these ideas come together in many cases is because of simple exposure to good ideas and then being able to do it and being encouraged to try it. And you all you students are in one of the few universities that truly thinks spatially and makes offers constantly for you to, hey, come on in, even if you just stick your toe in the water to try it out, it'll be worth your time. Now, my work on the Living Atlas, we have noticed that the words we use and all the maps we create, they have to connect to their audiences. Which audiences? The audiences we intended to see them, right? Not just the public, right? And not an audience we didn't target. Packed up in that statement is the inference. You need to think about what you're doing and what you're trying to say. Not a big deal. But in reflection, and the reason it took me 12 pages to use my own personal history in GIS to sort of uncover what have I noticed over the years? And if I could talk to a student today, what advantage would I try to give them going forward? Whether you choose spatial thinking as a key part of your education and your career, or it's just incidental. Maybe this will be my only chance to get at you, right, on this topic. What I noticed on these projects over 24 years, the thing that creates gaps and stalls out mapping projects and spatial thinking is right there on the screen: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And as I went back on all these projects, I was able to kind of think, well, here was the success. I mean, we got it delivered, customer paid us, we were happy. And then I remember the pain. The guy who told me I may not touch the data on the production server ever, even if there's a mistake. But we can fix it. No, you may not touch my production server. Actually had to go 13 floors down into IBM Global Services in an elevator to get to that server. And when I got off the elevator, there was a man with a gun, the security guard, to let me in. And I had to walk directly to the server, make whatever changes on the development server I needed to, and then if they worked, then we would be able to proceed. That was pretty scary for me. And I thought, do I really want to work in that environment? But once I understood his context, the uncertainty and doubt about that situation went away, once I had the context right. And the last line is just the thing I wanted to get across about fear, uncertainty, doubt. You're going to see it. It's going to be there. Just relax and help people around you relax. People gravitate towards fear, uncertainty, and doubt when there's what? Lack of information, lack of confidence, lack of belief. They've never seen a map like what you're talking about. So I realized I might be able to speak to you now about this because it is a fantastic time to think spatially. This is like, to me, the golden age. I'm sure some of your instructors would agree. We have more capability, access to data, access to software than we've ever had. And yet, projects can still stall out. We can put maps within the grasp of more people than ever, but they need to be good maps, purposeful. And our ability to discover and explain spatial stories is needed more than ever. So maybe take my perspective for a second. The problems you might take interest in solving in your career are out there. And there might be data about those problems. And maybe that data needs a little help. I've never seen data that is self-explanatory. Never. If I say to you right now, 103 degrees, that means nothing. If I say 103 degrees body temperature, okay, now we're getting on the same page. If I tell you one person in this room has 103 degree body temperature, do you now have the spatial context to start to think about taking action? You're gonna start looking around. Who's sweating? Besides me, right? And we as spatial thinkers, sometimes we're so proud of doing our work. We're so proud we manhandled that data to the ground and we made that map say what we want. I made that railroad map of quarter-mile distance to railroad. Okay, great. What does it mean? If people don't understand and we don't use words and context to make the maps meaningful, well, we've done all the hard part, but now we still have a little bit more work to do. These gaps exist because of technology. I've got the buggy up there. At one point in time, a horse and a buggy was the height of transportation technology, even in the cities. And then at some point, it started to become irrelevant, and then at one point, it's completely irrelevant in most areas. And the Mac SE, right there in the middle, anyone out there ever use a Mac SE? It's funny, you all have a little bit of gray. As do I. This is the technology change that put me on my career path. It has nothing to do with GIS. I was in journalism, and our newspaper was laid out using wax galleys at the time. A wax galley was you would hand your typewritten story to a person who would type the article up in a system that would spit it out on paper that had a wax backing, and you would hand place that on your newspaper layout. And when everything was just right, you know, picture about cutting and pasting, like literal cutting and paste, actual paste you can feel on your fingers. And you would paste it, and in college, I was given the opportunity to convert our newspaper from that legacy technology to the Mac SE. So instead of showing up at the printer in Washington, Missouri, a small town 45 minutes away, with paper that I handed to them and waited 6 hours for this to get done. Now I showed up with a Mac SE disk, a 3.5-inch floppy. You can look it up. And I would show up and hand that, and I'll never forget the day I handed it to the owner, a guy named, I think it was Greg, and I handed it to him, and as we walked past the typesetters, I got the dirtiest looks from these women. And it was my first encounter with what? Productivity, automation, change. And I thought about that. I felt a little guilty, but also I kind of knew, well, that thing ain't going anywhere. Desktop publishing became a thing. I started my early career doing some of that work. But the real reason I'm in GIS is because of the disruption in mapping that technology has caused. I was on a 23-day trip in Colorado near this mountain, and I looked at a topo sheet one day, and it said, last updated 1967. And I thought, they have to be using computers to make maps, right? I mean, I'd done all this desktop publishing. I know what fonts are and all this stuff. Maps look like they have lots of fonts and lots of color. And USGS has to be using, don't they? So I went to what was then called Google, was a local library. You had to go in and ask a person a question, and I'm not kidding. I remember this conversation. I came home from this trip. I was 23 years old, and I remember a conversation with my mom saying, I think I want to search this. Nowadays, we'd say, search this up. It was probably not what I said at the time, but I want to research this. She said, go to the library, talk to Mrs. So-and-so, and ask for the microfiche. And I'm like, the what, the what? And we found articles, including articles about Esri, which I didn't know anything about, and GIS. And so my plan in 1993 was, I'm going to combine technology, PCs, and map making somehow, some way. So my plan was to go apply at a number of schools, and Ohio State, for some reason, accepted me. And after 6 months of realizing I'm not cut out for a PhD, I wanted to be very hands-on and applied in my work. So I tried to be true to my own nature right away. I was lured and interested, but I wasn't sure I personally could achieve that. So at that time, I'm talking with Dr. Dwayne Marble, one of the people who was around at the start of GIS, one of the fathers of GIS, really. He kind of understood my goals and helped me get an internship at Esri in 1994 with professional services. A gentleman named Don Chambers hired me to work with Jerry Clancy, and then they were foolish enough to bring me back the following September and hire me full time. So my plan during this time period was to combine work for real customers. Every logo on there, I'd spent at least 6 months working on one project or another with them, getting exposed to their way of viewing the world. So no longer am I the expert. I've got my shiny master's in GIS degree from the Ohio State University with Dwayne Marble, and all of a sudden I show up at work and I'm just one of many, right? One of many. There's a lot of bright people in these organizations who hire you. And I'll be honest with you, it took me 6 months to a year to adjust my thinking of, I'm just one of many and I need to be of service to these people, right? I knew what I knew. I knew what I was confident in. But when you're around a lot of other people who are on a team working on a project, it turns out you're just one of many in a role, and you have something to contribute. It was Jerry Clancy and Don Chambers and people like Scott Murray on the, in the team who kind of, let's say, encouraged me. Can I use that verb? And can you interpret what I'm saying? They encouraged me a lot of times through very direct conversations. As a young person needing to maybe shift my attitude, shift my belief system, and be of service, not be important. And in my case, that was very valuable. Everybody's different. And I see that now as a manager of many young people. I see that I can't fix somebody, and I don't want to fix somebody. I want them to experience and have the opportunity to grow and experience some of the things I've been able to experience. Check out those logos, ArcView and ArcInfo, back in the day. They don't exist anymore. Not in that form. And this is one of the lessons I learned along this time period. That technology is just going to keep going by like a river. It just keeps coming, right? This was pre-internet. Well, early 2000s, internet's starting to cook, right? But all of this stuff, I could be an expert in how many commands in ArcInfo, maybe 500 I knew. That was one of the measures by which you were judged. How many commands in ArcInfo do you know? Okay, well, whatever the number was, it didn't matter now because this river of technology keeps going by. And I started to realize, man, I kind of want to stay on the shore. And I kind of want to cast. And I kind of want to pull things in that I'm good at pulling in. So I better figure out what I'm good at. And I noticed on these projects, I always gravitated towards the people issues. Just me, you may be different. We had people who were expert programmers, but you couldn't put them in front of a customer. No way. That's not a good idea. Not without a handler. Right? And I'm just being frank because y'all deserve it. We'd get data people who were like, you can't map this data that way. Why not? It's just showing all the outliers. How'd the outliers get in? Not a good answer to give back to the data person, I found out. Remember I said, I'm work in progress. So every one of these projects was a success, most of them financially successful, if not all. And then each one had a learning experience that went along with it, and that's going to feed into the next plan. When I left professional services, I wanted to bring that experience of working with customers into a product. On the left, this is the old interface to business analysts online, aka the first one. I look at it now and it's very quaint. It's like seeing a picture of your puppy. And then on the right is a more modern version. But what I took away from this time period was it's very different building a product than working on a project, right? And sometimes we can lose sight of that. My plan going forward, I
figured I want to be a geographer again. I want to have wide-ranging interests going after things like, in the top left, after the Census 2010 came out, we built an online atlas to it, and we learned a lot about our own products, about how easy they were in some areas, how difficult they were to get things done in other areas. And I started noticing where the friction occurred, the gaps. And I started, through the guidance of people like Charlie Fry, Clint Brown, and now Sean Breyer as well, I started learning better ways to articulate gaps. Right? Have you ever gone in and complained at somebody about something and you realize somewhere in there, the way you're describing this is making them double down that they're not going to change? And sometimes it's just the way we approach it, right? You may say, Charlie, your map has a bug in it. And Charlie may respond, yeah? How do you know it wasn't intended to do that, be that way, or work that way? Oh, I didn't think about that. And over time, on these projects like the Atlas of the 2010 census, the story map version of it directly to the right, other projects like this food desert map of Redlands, areas in green, you can walk to a grocery store in 10 minutes, assuming you can walk 3 miles an hour. Areas in red, or I'm sorry, areas in yellow, you can drive to it, but all those red dots, that is an estimate of the number of people living in poverty who can't walk to a grocery store. They probably don't have access to a car. They have to choose other options. This project in particular got me interested in how can we start to see data differently and how can we expose it? And then the Living Atlas of the world you are familiar with, it's a collection of thousands of such innovative layers from all kinds of people. We believe strongly that a great map is a window into information. I mean, this is aesthetically pleasing, is it not? Anyone think this is terrible? It's okay, you can say you think it's terrible. But we use this slide a lot because it tends to garner a simple reaction from people. Just sort of a, oh, that's nice. And oftentimes, that's the first step in getting a conversation moving forward. Here's a map of California vaccination rates by school district. Areas in red are out of compliance. And we've got about a 6-year history of, in this case, the Ravendale Termo Elementary School up in Northern California. Oops. And they've been as low as 53% compliance in the most recent year measured. So here's kind of where the gaps start. I've kind of indicated that on the right side. The data person who provides this data, they kind of say, well, here's the data. I'm not a mapper. I'm done. I provided you data. And the GIS person might say, well, I took your data and I was able to get it into a mappable form, and I made a thematic map of the data, so I made sure there's different colors for different values, and I am done. And there's a key third person. This is the person who's actually accountable for telling the story of this data, or the story about the subject that this data purports to represent. And that is, the storyteller's attitude is, wait, at what point is a district considered out of compliance? Is that a legal definition of compliance? Are there legal implications to this? And therefore, this map really needs to be clear. Areas in red are out of compliance and everybody else isn't. This starts to get at the perspective people need. This is a project brought to us last year. People in the Inland Empire were noting that the number of judges in Riverside County and San Bernardino County is far below the allocation needed. And so they came in the door with a story, and we promptly said, do you have data? As we always do. And they said, yeah, it's right here in this PDF. Anyone ever scraped data out of a PDF before? Yeah, those of you smiling, you know exactly what I'm after. It's like, oh, you consider that data, okay. All right, it's okay. No, we can, how many counties are there? There's 58 counties, and it was Jennifer Bell on my team, sitting in the back, by the way, who actually agreed to hand code this data in. And as soon as we made the map on the right, we're map makers. We're gonna make you a map. And we kind of noticed it's not really that interesting a map. We knew what they said at the start, that San Bernardino County and Riverside County had a problem. We were able to make this map illustrate that problem using size and color. But Jennifer realized we should put this in bar chart form, because look at how much more impressive the bar chart is. Like, though the gap, the number of judges needed is off the charts almost. There's like almost 40 that are needed. So sometimes the map is just a vehicle to get you to a better expression of the conclusion. Ripped from the headlines, I was asked to make this map for a state agency. These are historic burn areas in red, and population, just a little dot density map I had laying around. So we took advantage of the fact that GIS is quick and easy, we can put them together, and let people just start to soak this in. Where you see black dots underneath red burn areas, it should lead you to ask questions, right? Like, what happened there? We know some of the stories, like the tragedy in Paradise last year, but some of these areas are right around us. And we would want this map to explain to us, did that burn in like 1950 or 1900 or last year? Just the classic GIS map overlay sometimes is a great point to start conversations. Now, I work a lot on maps like that. We call them policy maps because we want to, A, inform policymakers in a direct and meaningful way. Remember, these are people who probably have 2 minutes to react to whatever you're showing them. So this can't be a poster. This can't be something complex. It can't be a paper. You have 2 minutes, and you need something as simple as this or this to get their attention and cause a conversation to occur. This is a painting. I love this painting because see in the lower right corner here, there's a policy map. And I didn't realize the significance of this till I read the article. It's a link in here is available. Oh, here's the mouse, where you can check out this article. I believe I have it here. There we go. Visualizing slavery, the map Abraham Lincoln spent hours studying. This map made a painting, so think about that. The painter had to decide who to paint in this painting, and for whatever reason, they decided this map was important enough to represent. I bring that up not to set that as your goal to make a painting. It's not, I think, a reasonable objective. But it does point out our work can influence people who are trying to decide what to do. We have a whole website dedicated to it. It's called Esri Maps for Public Policy. A lot of my team's work and that of many other teams ends up here as good examples of what to do with maps and make them available. A lot of times, this is the challenge in terms of map making and spatial thinking that we all wish for. We have a clear problem to solve, yes. We know how to solve it, even better. We have all the data we need and more to do that map. And we have ideas, right? You ever get data and you have no idea what you're supposed to do with it? Phone a friend. We have a particular audience in mind, and we have unlimited time and resources. So that's the ideal challenge, right? And then there's the reality. We don't know what problem we're supposed to solve just yet. We're not sure how we're going to solve that problem. Vision zero. 0 bicycle accidents, right? 0 fatalities from bicycle accidents. Big popular thing, big goal. We're not sure how to solve it. We have some data for a map. In the case of bike accidents, you might have data about where the accidents occurred. What do you not have? I'll give you another hint. You have data on which accidents did occur. You don't have any data on close calls. Right? You don't have any data on successful event-free trips. So sometimes we're always on the search for more data to contextualize the some data that we do have. Part of the reality is we may not have any particular ideas for a map, so we'll just, map the data. This is the problem. I see people doing this constantly. Well, I don't know what map to make, so I'm just going to map the data as it was handed to me, and that's okay. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm saying you should do that. But recognize that's just a starting point to get the data to be mappable. You ever put a bunch of dots on a map to the point they all coalesce into a single point? This happens with crime data all the time because the crime data is often reported as corner of New York Street and Redlands Boulevard. And so all those dots stack up on one another. And so the format of the data is actually inhibiting spatial thinking and spatial understanding. What are we going to do about that? Oftentimes we don't have any particular audience in mind. So she's the map maker. She must know. Well, yeah, but somebody should challenge that. Who do you think that somebody is? Might be you. I'm encouraging it to be you. Time limits and unlimited resources, no, that doesn't exist. We always have time limits and we always have limited resources. And the savvy person tries to figure out, okay, what can I get done now? What can I get done 2 weeks before the deadline so that they have a last chance to fix it? And then what can I get done after it's released? So I encourage you to accept these challenges, not complain about them. I will tell you, you're probably going to go through a phase in your careers where complaining seems to be useful. I think it is emotionally. I think it helps people identify where the real limits are, but push through. Keep pushing. Don't hold on to that complaint. Try to be that person who's figuring out, man, I wish that ArcView, or what are we on now? ArcGIS? I wish that ArcGIS would handle it this way. That's the whole conversation my company loves to have. How can we be better? We're one of the organizations that's interested in that. Now, I promised you a little bit of a methodology, right? And I've shown you some good examples, I hope, or at least some examples you can maybe start to connect with. Now, how do these things happen? I threw together, I started to realize that most people think about themselves first. It's normal. I'm on this project. What do I need to do? Maybe you're the data wrangler, or maybe you're the person designated to make this map. And maybe making the map of quarter-mile distance to railroads starts you thinking, hey, Jim's map used census block centroids. I wonder if I could measure the distance to actual parcels in a town. Oh, okay. So sometimes a great map leads to ideas, which leads to, well, let's think about what kind of analysis would be appropriate. And analysis always leads to more data. And what I find is projects kind of go round and round and round. It doesn't matter where you start. Maybe somebody throws data at you and says, help me. Or somebody says, I have this idea. Do you think any data is out there? So I have those two conversations 40 times a week in my role. And it's just because I've tried to present myself as somebody you can have a conversation with, and we'll see where we can take it together. What I noticed, though, is you can get lost around this circle and not know when to stop, when to start, when to quit, when to ask another question. Then someone else comes along and they inject another angle. And I noticed that it's not necessarily that you're going around the circle uselessly. None of us want that. We all want to go in an iterative fashion, but we want to lift each other up, right? We want to get better. As a new employee, I wanted to learn from people around me. I had trouble expressing it because I was young. But eventually I figured out, in my case, what I needed to do is just shut up and listen to these people and ask very few questions, but make them good questions. And if anybody gets challenged by my questions, okay, maybe I don't do that in public meetings, which is a mistake I see a lot of people make, not just young, but a lot of people wait until they're into a meeting format, and now they're going to bring out the guns. Have you thought about this? Here's a thought. Take that question to that person privately, so that you both can have an honest conversation, not in front of their staff or their boss. Sometimes it is a little bit about judgment and finesse. What I noticed about this movement, I was thinking this was circular movement until I started to realize it's not. It's a spiral movement. And in particular, I realized the way it came to my attention is I noticed a colleague of mine went into a demo, gave a perfect demo of maps of demographic data, I think it was, spot on, technically perfect, well delivered, didn't connect at all with the customer. And I had observed these kinds of briefings enough time to realize, oh, I didn't set her up for success. I didn't give her a hint. I didn't tell her where the customer was from. So she demoed in the Washington, D.C. area, and this person's from Sacramento. We should have demoed in Sacramento, in an area that they are familiar with. These subtle little things, I just didn't do my job as a manager to set that person up for success. And so I started to realize these briefings, when these briefings go well, a customer comes in and we tell them things they don't know, and they tell us things we don't know, and we find common ground,
And at Esri, you always end up with action items, probably around here too. Have a meeting, what are action items? Okay, you're gonna go look at data, you're gonna go look at some mapping options, you're gonna go talk to this. I started to notice that the maps and the mapping projects that go well are the ones where we get everybody like moving in the same direction. Part of that starts with reading the room or reading the team. So what does everybody want? So in the previous slide, it's just 4 people, right? I don't know who's who. But very quickly, or if you do a little prep work, you can figure out, well, who's the idea person? It's the person on the right. Who's the data person? Look how she's looking at him. She's not judging him, but she's not quite sure, is she? That's typical data person. The story person does not have a laptop open. She's writing stuff down. As he talks and as other people talk, that person is taking notes. And I don't know what that 4th person is. I think she's from PR or something, but she looks very attentive and interested. It's important to read the room on a project to figure out, wait, are we all on the same page or are we really far apart to begin with? What I realized about the spiral, and the reason I talk about this is I would see in these briefings, Jack and other leaders bring people up to each other's level of understanding. So when a customer comes to see us, Mobil Oil, I don't know anything about the oil business, and I don't need to know everything. I just need to know what do they have interest in, because they know their business, and they know what they're doing, and I know GIS, or some part of it, and I know what I'm doing, but what we're trying to find is an intersection of what's possible. Some of that is easy, some of that is hard. What I started to notice is every person, if you treat them like a gatekeeper, that's much better than ignoring them. You may not like somebody in the room, or you may not understand their motives just yet, but if you treat them as a gatekeeper and start to think, well, what information do they need to feel comfortable about what I'm doing? Your whole goal is to get them on board with spatial thinking to begin with. They may never have done this before. They may never have seen their data on a map before. So many briefings I've been in, we start with get the customer's data onto the map. We'll talk a little bit about that. So how can I take that idea person who has ideas but knows nothing about GIS mapping or spatial thinking? They have an idea, it's just not based in reality yet. How can I get them up this spiral from I need to educate them a little bit, I need to explore data with them, not at them. I need them to be a part of it. How do we do the next step? If I can see data on a map, I might start to ask questions. Questions are good. They're a gap. Gaps is where the money's at. Gaps are where the money's at. Gaps are where the interesting work is at. The person who can identify a gap first can start to fill it first or get the team moving in that direction. So what stories do they need to hear right now? I've seen many briefings and projects where we drown the customer in too much detail too quick. They just want to understand their customers better, right? Or they just want to understand how to make their marketing dollar go farther. Or they want to understand how their policy choices are adversely affecting the environment in one area and might be an opportunity for offsets in a second area. So how do we get all that moving in the right direction? So I'm going to take you through just 5 of the quick little things we do, either in a room or over time, over email and presentations. Absolutely the first place to start. If you're with somebody who isn't really a spatial thinker or on a given topic, maybe they are a spatial thinker, but they've never thought about this topic before. Let's start out on a common plane of education. Let me show you your data on the map. If you can get them to give you some data, oh, that's just great, because it's their data, and you're going to be the hero who shows it to them for the first time. And then we usually, in our demos, we'll kind of explore a little bit, make sure they understand this isn't a static map like from National Geographic magazine in the 1950s. This is live data. Right? And just let that sit in their head. They don't have to fully understand it, but as long as they understand this is live and we can zoom around. Where are you from? I'm from Sacramento. Well, let's go over there and look. Okay. And show them something that they know so they develop confidence. And then also show them something they've probably never seen a map revealed before. How many of you know what Zillow is?
Right, and the first time you ever used Zillow, what address did you type in? Your home address? And how many of you will be honest with me and tell me that you next typed in your neighbor's address or your friend's address to see what their house is worth? Come on. But that's what we do as humans. We want to trust, but we're not going to leave it at one experiment, are we? We're not going to trust Zillow after one query. We're not going to trust any spatial thinking after just one demo. But the key is to get them interested in it, right? And to gauge their interest. Are they receptive to it? Once they're starting to explore the data, usually some ideas start to emerge, some conversation. This is where it gets messy, and you got to be patient. You got to be okay with people coming up with lame ideas, or people coming up with ideas you've heard 1,000 times before, but you're going to smile politely and say, that's really good. That's a great idea. I built online systems for Taco Bell, Albertsons, Q-Lube. They were all site selection, and they all had a magic secret. We draw rings around proposed stores, and we total up the demographics in those rings. And they all thought, this is our version, we have the secret sauce, right? And that's fine. We want people engaged wherever. But where you come in, especially as young people, especially as students fresh out of school or about to be, you've been exposed to some of the latest stuff. Sometimes senior management doesn't have time to keep up on everything Esri's doing or our competitors are doing. That's fine. Somebody's got to play that role. What are the new techniques? When drive time analysis, the ability to measure a polygon within a 10-minute walk of a store, when that came out and was made popular, it's revolutionary. Next, as we move up the spiral, we know we have success when the results of the analysis have been explained. We've explained it in a way that answers the question, okay, who cares? Who cares about this conclusion? If you can answer that question, that is a big sign of success. Sometimes we do spatial analysis and the results are just kind of muddy, and maybe we formed the question wrong, or maybe the results just aren't interesting. That will happen from time to time. But these are the kind of questions that, as you rise up the spiral towards institutionalization, you've got to get past the stage of, why is this relevant? You're the map person, you're the spatial thinker, you did this work, now tell me how it's going to save me money or increase revenues, right? That's usually what businesses ask. Or in other spaces, there are similar metrics. How are we going to help? Once things are accepted as this is the way to think, now it's time to institutionalize, right? And what do I mean by that? That topo sheet I took with me on a backpack, I bought it, I put it in my backpack, and it saved us multiple times on those 23 days. That thing is institutionalized, right? They have a machine to produce it, and they charge money for me to purchase it. It's institutionalized, that's what I mean. It's so well accepted, it's like a standard. But think about it. We're constantly creating new software and technology. There's more and more data coming every day. We got bright people coming out of school all the time. The work's not done, folks. You've got to get in there and come up with the next set of maps that need to be institutionalized. We all have maps on our phones now. At one point, that would have been a crazy idea, and it no longer is. So our idea is to move everyone up through the levels, mainly through dialogue. It takes a little longer, but it is so worth it because A, you get to develop relationships with people, you get to learn things from the data people, you get to learn things from the IT people. And as we move people up, I've got a few examples here. If we want to start out with, hey, we were talking and we think we should expand our operations into California, or a statement like, our city needs more affordable housing, so how can we generate interest in all the parcels or properties that our city owns? That's a real question from the LA City Controller. Okay, so the first thing is, how do we get people from the bottom to the top? First, we have to understand each other. What are we talking about? We're talking about, do we even have the data for this idea? In the case of the LA City Controller, yes, they did asterisk, and the asterisk took a period of time for them to agree. I actually sat in the meeting where the LA City Controller, maybe I shouldn't talk about this, I sat in the meeting with the LA City Controller, and the database person argued about, are there 11,683 parcels available or 11,686, a difference of 3. They argued it because they both know their domain. And it was great to see, but they got on the same page. Once they were on the same page, now how can we explore the data? I'll give you an example. In that same meeting, at some point, the LA City Controller was handed the mouse to start exploring the story map of parcels available for sale so that he could so-called kick the tires. He could see if he believes in what is being represented as true. And I put in red, when you demo, always have in mind, I want them to take over this demo at some point. I want them to explore the data, the layer, the map I've created. Because once they start engaging with the mouse, something clicks in their brain. I've seen it time after time, and that's why I took the time to put it in here as one of my secret ninja moves on how to get engagement and dialogue going. Put the mouse in their hand. At the analysis level, over time you learn to listen for a map. For some of you, this will be intuitive and easy. Others, you may not have any idea what I'm talking about. So I gave an example quote. Our city needs a more affordable housing. How can we generate interest in all the parcel properties that our city owns? The word map isn't there, is it? But how can we generate interest? Okay, interest from whom? Developers, citizens. Your opportunity is to ask follow-up questions. Identify the audience. Who are we talking about? Because that will guide our exploration and our analysis of the data. The biggest thing I can encourage here is don't wait for an invitation. As a spatial thinker, you may be the only one in the room who gets it that this is a spatial problem or may be a spatial problem, right? And absent any input like that, people are going to assume that affordable housing in LA or available parcels is a continuous surface of availability evenly distributed across the city of LA, kind of like homelessness. Homelessness in LA, it's everywhere, right? That's kind of what you hear until you start to map it, and then you start to see, well, in a way it is everywhere, and in another way there are severe concentrations that are getting people's attention. You don't know that till you start looking. Once we start to think about the stories we need to tell, we usually start almost right away framing up the story, because a lot of times people come in with a preconceived notion or an idea, and like any plan, it doesn't necessarily survive first contact with the data. So we start to tell the story, and we start to see, does the map really support that? If I write it this way, do they react? As the person telling the story, that person needs to have a little thick skin and be curious and not be so committed to their opinion. They need to also engage others to see, what are they seeing? Are you open to feedback? Are you able to seek additional facts that connect what you're seeing to the context someone else may have? And one of the gaps I see at this stage of thing is resistance when the map you made doesn't fit the narrative they had in mind. This has happened to me 3 times in the past week with, let's just say, people at the state, where they asked me to look into something. I looked into it, made the map. The map is true as far as I can tell. The data from the Department of Finance is good as far as I can tell, and it doesn't fit the narrative they already had in their mind. I can't fix that. They may not want to fix that. And my only defense is I'm going to make sure my map gets out, right? If they don't want to tell that story, that's okay. It's their project. But the way I hang on to my integrity about it is I know what the map says as best I can. And if I've made a mistake, I'm definitely going to go back and correct it, right? So once things are no longer an R&D effort or a special project or a departmental project, if the work is deemed essential for the success of an organization, it's there because it earned it from the start, right? We've gone all the way down to educating every member of the team about what's possible, about how to work together, how to dialogue about problems as they occur, and we want them all to end up We want all the projects to become institutionalized that deserve it. We don't want to do bad ideas, right? In the Living Atlas, for example, we get tons of ideas. Hey, this layer should be in the Living Atlas. Why? Well, here's the reason. Okay, great. Is it updated frequently? Well, no. So this thing will be stale in about a year? Yeah. Okay, I think maybe we'll think about this a little longer. What I noticed about the gaps that exist in people's spatial thinking, it's not that any one individual has a huge problem. It's more about if we don't have people who engage, then we're not going to progress. I think analysts are in a super powerful position to reveal the needs and opportunities. These storytellers are dying for facts and patterns and change and animations and something that's eye-catching, right? You can't just cite text. You also need to show what you're talking about. We don't want to wait for an invitation to do something amazing. That's an error I see a lot of people make. They're waiting for the boss to tell them what to do. Okay, I see reasons for that, but also be curious and let your curiosity drive some initiative, some effort to do something amazing. The software and the data, they require your direct involvement. How many of you ever made a map where you accepted the defaults? I did, I do it. It happens. It's okay, the rest of you. Just move on at some point from whatever the defaults are and start to think critically. You've got to be involved with your data and critically review it. And I think insecurity on a team isn't a bad thing. It's just a thing, like fear, uncertainty, doubt. Those are just signals people aren't ready to move forward. So do you want to help them or not, right? And that's the attitude I try to project. I'm here to help. If I'm moving too fast, it's not a problem to slow down. How do you close the gaps? Well, one thing is to identify yourself down this list of people. Are you a data person, a software person? Are you a map maker, GIS person, a storyteller? I particularly call out leadership. Leadership needs to push, and they need to push on others to demand more, to ask for more, whatever fits the culture in the project, but to set the bar high. I was, as you can tell, working at Esri 24 years. When I joined Charlie Fry's group, it took me 6 months to deprogram my thinking about my map making, right? So I've been at Esri 18 years at that point. It took me 6 months to stop doing it the old way and really hear what Clint and Charlie were challenging me. You can do better. I think you can do better with this map. I think this could be better. And like after a while, it got kind of irritating, I'll be frank, right? But it made me better, and the fact that it took me 6 months, it'll probably take you all 3. I'm just thick. But it happens. And once you turn your ego 90 degrees, right, and you're open to that kind of feedback, you can do better. You learn you can turn that on your boss. Subtly, as in, I made the map you asked for, boss. Oh, this other thing, I made it too. I don't know if you'll take interest in it. I think it's pretty good, and that's our other little ninja secret about always deliver the map you were asked to deliver by the boss, and then try to figure out how to slide something in that's a little bit better or introduces another wrinkle or another angle. And if you do that often enough, it won't happen the first day, the first week, or the first year. But if you're consistent, all of a sudden you become known as this person who thinks outside the box. And you're here at the University of Redlands. You're already that person. I'm just telling you, don't let circumstances bury that, right? Don't let fear, uncertainty, doubt enter into your thinking. Don't be too brash. Like I say, it took a year for people to beat on me that I wasn't all that, right? And it worked. Now I'm all that privately. But I try to let my work speak for itself, and more importantly, I try to connect with people who can make my work better. And that's what all these recommendations are. If you're a leader, go seek new perspectives. Coach, most importantly, give people permission. Clint kept telling me, Charlie kept telling me, I think you can do better. That's totally different than anything I'd ever heard, right? And that's what you want in leadership, and that's what you can provide to others. Okay? When you're dealing with that data person, this happened to me 2 weeks ago. We got the data person from the state on the phone. She was so nervous about what we were going to map of her data. And the first words out of her mouth were about the data's limitations and the outliers. And we were like, hold on, can we just show you what we did? And as soon as we put it on, the map on the screen, she was delighted. It was
this map, if I can show it. This map here about the supply and demand of housing, affordable housing. Each county and each municipality has a goal set by the state. The ones in green are adhering, the ones in red are not. Does anyone see a problem? But then here's the map that I heard that they didn't describe. Here is how many housing units are recommended. Here's how many are zoned. There's only a couple of communities where you see a little sliver of magenta peeking out. So only a few communities haven't zoned for what they were supposed to do. Next, you gotta allow permits. Do you see which communities are not keeping up in terms of permits? So they were approaching this from a percentage polygon choropleth fill map. We thought we'd toss this at them to say, this makes it really apparent where the problem is. Where is the bottleneck in getting new housing approved? And then lastly, what has changed over some specific period of time? The other map I wanted to share was this population change map. Pretty typical one, Department of Finance, but some of the numbers people didn't agree that are we actually predicting a decrease in population in some of these Northern California communities by 2030? I am not the data expert on this. I just downloaded the data, I read the metadata, I provided the map. So now we're at that negotiation stage of do we trust this and how far do we trust this? This was a surprising map. Food imports and exports among California counties. The University of Illinois just published this. We grabbed it and we mapped it based on inflows and outflows in kilograms of food to each county. And I was surprised to see LA County be a net exporter of food. Like when you think LA County, do you think farms? Do you know there's 2 ports in LA County? With fish. That's the difference, right? And that was surprising. Or here's a nice juxtaposition. Fresno County is a net exporter. Madera County is a net importer. Kind of interesting. We still digging into that. This is one of those classic maps where as soon as it sees the light of day. I feel like Galileo must have felt the first time he looked through his telescope, first light coming through. And he's like, oh my God, there's 4 moons up there. I'm gonna be excommunicated. I feel like that on map projects sometimes. If I show this, I'm gonna be excommunicated. That is the part where it takes a little bit of courage to follow through with these things. In terms of you data people, how many of you consider yourself a data person? Do you know what I mean by that? You're the person everybody goes to help with their Excel problem? I see. She's holding her hand down here because she doesn't want to be identified as the go-to. But data people, a lot of times, they're their own worst enemy. You got to find that data person who loves the data and what it expresses, and then work with them on that. Show them how a map can bring out the things that they have noticed. I know I've got success with the data person when they say, I've never seen that before. I've never seen that pattern. It's like, yes, we got through to them on Spatial. Finally, the last comment I have, and to take questions, is we always talk about a map's purpose. And that is always the starting point. Anytime somebody throws data or an idea at us, we at some point try to steer the discussion towards, yeah, that's interesting, a map about food imports and exports for California. What's your purpose? Sometimes they just repeat themselves and they don't understand what you're asking. That's okay. We're going to get them there someday. I had a director at Esri give me a set of data about sales for Esri globally, country by country. And she said, well, you're the mapping guru. Make me a map of this sales data. It's confidential. I'm like, okay. And I knew this was a little bit of a trap, so I went ahead and made the map. I made it this way, that way, size. Picture a map with big circles in European countries and smaller circles in other countries. And I took it back to her knowing she'd be disappointed. And she was. She said, well, this isn't what I expected. I'm like, yeah, I know. She's like, well, what does that mean? I said, you have an expectation, but you haven't told me what you're really looking for in this sales data. Are you looking for regional variation in Europe versus EMEA or India? Like, what is the angle you're at? And finally she confessed, oh, what I'm looking for is this, and explained some area of overperformance, underperformance, et cetera. Okay, now we have an angle to approach. The purpose, her purpose was not about, I have a purpose for a map. Her purpose was, I have to be accountable to a board of directors meeting. I have to explain a certain thing, and I need a map to support me in that purpose. Now I'm empowered to do something meaningful. We made some changes real quick. And that's what I enjoy most about WebGIS is we can engage at the speed that the person sitting across from you is ready to engage at. Sometimes they're not ready. I'll be honest, our technology is now at a point we can move faster than the decision makers are ready to move. So that puts us in a good position as spatial thinkers. I encourage you to keep looking into this, even if you only think you'll use it a little bit, or you're just sort of curious how this all works. Keep going with that curiosity. My curiosity, as I said, started out with, this map has to be updated using computers by now, right? And I've had a whole career, got a mortgage and kids and all that stuff, just because I was curious. So maybe beware your curiosity a little bit, trust it though. At the end of the day, it's going to drive you in good places, and I think there's never been a better time for you to bring spatial thinking into your world, and you're certainly at the right institution to support you in that effort. I support you in that effort, Charlie does, your other instructors, the business school, the spatial analytics. I mean, we're all here to make that happen. So I'm hopeful that you have some good questions for me now, because you've had an hour to think about it. With that, I'll take any questions. Yes?
So I was waiting, your last slide, you had the software people. I was waiting for you to get to the software people.
Yeah,
Part of me curious and hoping.
I was eyeing the time, and I don't want to short shrift the software people. Anyone here a software developer or wannabe? Hey, cool. Software people are very special. And let me tell you why. There are entire teams of them who build something called application programming interfaces, APIs. They build all these components. Think of it like Legos. And so there's entire teams. When you build software, you start with the tiniest Lego, and then you build it up into a little unit, and then you build that up into a unit, and then, well, everybody has to agree, what is the most important dimension on a Lego? Do you know? It's the dimension of that little circle on top. Because if all the Legos use the same dimension little circle on top, that little thing that sticks up, I don't know, it's probably got a name. Knob. Lego expert. That little knob, can you imagine if Lego had 5 different standards for knob sizes? Would it be as good a product? No. So standards are a thing. These software people are special for this reason. All the emerging capabilities in terms of spatial analysis and mapping and getting at the spatial goodness happens because some thoughtful programmer read a requirement, understood a requirement, and then said, yeah, I'll do that. I'm going to go build that, right? But they need inspiration. They need a reason why. It can't be, well, I would like the size of a symbol on a map to work this way because I want it. They need people like you who explain why that matters, right? Have you ever been irritated by driving directions on a map? Yep, you can probably think of examples. I know where I live, literally, it'll send me the southern route through Moreno Valley, through Alessandro, or it'll send me on the 10 to go to San Diego, and it's like a 200-foot difference. Drives me crazy. It's like, really, you're always gonna send me down the 10 because I'm 200 feet closer than this other route? You notice these little things, right? Good relationships with software developers are like this. Charlie, I love this code that does the directions. Really useful to me. I love it. You know what's interesting? Have you ever noticed how sensitive it is to just a few feet difference? It'll send you down one road. Why is that? So I'm seeking understanding. I'm not telling him it's a bug. You and I both know it's a bug. If this were the 1980s, I'd tell him, it's a bug, fix it. That's the way things happened back then. Hey, we're all a little more decent nowadays. We'd like to value each other's opinion, and that really is the most rewarding part of my career now, is
seeking information, helping software people. They want to build things, and they especially love things that are cool, fun, fast, amazing. And you have ideas, so if you can partner up and start from what they've already built or examples you've seen elsewhere, a lot of times you get some of your best relationships by recognizing that person can write code for days and I can dream up stuff for days. Man, if we can just work together, that's all right. That's kind of the relationship Esri tries to seek with our customer base. Sometimes we're good at it, sometimes we miss the mark. We get that, but we're always looking for that. So yeah, it's a good question. I love the software people. I can't do anything without software. I can't do anything without data. But I really believe you're in the same position I am. You can make the biggest difference with your ideas and your engagement. You don't have to learn to write software. You don't have to learn to manage data, but you gotta learn to be a critical consumer of it, right? Yes?
So Jim, tell us more about clients or even students. How do you create curiosity to make them want to explore that data more or ask questions that will lead to an analysis? Or what's your experience been with that? How do you do that?
Yeah, the question was how do we develop curiosity in students to drive some of these discussions? How do you, well, let's start with curiosity. What is it? It's kind of like, how does this work? It's a little bit of suspended disbelief, right? I don't necessarily believe this is the only way to do things. That happens to be ingrained in me for various reasons, many of them stemming to the fact I've got 4 sisters, and I was the 4th out of 5 children, so I had to learn to not accept the status quo sometimes. Can I phrase it that way? Don't always, when you got 5 moms, you kind of got to be able to think on your feet about alternatives. And I think curiosity, it goes where it goes. Sometimes you take inspiration from articles. Sometimes you think, yeah, income inequality, yeah. How's that work? What do I think income equality looks like in a community? I had some students at the University of Redlands come to a city council meeting once and talk about diversity. It was really fascinating to hear their perspective. And I asked him a question afterward. How do you judge diversity? Like, census measures it in kind of a data way, but how do you think about it? And it was interesting to hear some of the responses, right? And my curiosity was not about how can I think about it differently. It was more about, let me see it through your eyes for a second. I think that's the key. If you can get outside yourself, even for 5 minutes, to try to view a topic through the lens of someone else, whether they're a software developer or someone who opposes your views, at least you can start to see, okay, so this is what's driving their thinking? Wow. Okay, interesting. And maps are very persuasive and powerful tools for trying out different perspectives on things, right? And that's what I find interesting about them. You can use the map to drive your curiosity. What does this data look like on a map? That's the starting point. Once you see it on the map, again, a lot of times that leads to other questions. So I guess part of my answer is biased. I'm always going to look for an opportunity to put it on the map to see if there's anything there. And don't let people push you around and tell you, don't be curious about that. You don't need to look there. Usually if they tell you don't need to look there, you need to look there. So, trying to think, what should I have covered that you wish I had?
So we have a number of undergraduates here in the college, and they're here of their own choice. We're going to call it that. And one of the reasons that we have them come is to expose them to the opportunities that ESRI provides students here, and to the notion that GIS and spatial analysis is a potential career. I wonder if you might speak to them about the ways that they could utilize this skill set across a variety of careers, right? They're not all going to be cartographers, not all
Yeah.
going to be geographers, but certainly the point that I'm trying to make and others are trying to make is that this is important and it can be visible in a lot of different careers.
So the question was for the undergrads and others thinking about careers, not just in spatial thinking or mapping, but also in other topic areas. Is any of this relevant, or how is it relevant? I'd argue, yeah, you could take this same slide deck, take out all the language about mapping and spatial thinking, put in finance, put in marketing, put in any topic you want. If you can't get people all moving in the same direction because they share a foundation, a common set of facts, a common set of understanding, if you can be that person who causes that spiraling activity to happen, you're invaluable. And for whatever reason, Esri seems to attract these people, so maybe we foster the culture more than we inhibit it. I've seen both. We're not perfect. But I do think this is directly transferable to any area of interest. The arts. Because of my work with mapping, I've become more exposed to art than ever before. I previously had an engineer's attitude about art. I don't get it. And that's it. I don't need to. Until I started seeing our creative lab using color and art and form, and I hear them talking a language that I don't understand. And I started hanging out with those people in the creative lab more to just understand it from an application standpoint. Why did you apply this technique here and not here? And just being a sponge. I was self-educating, right? I was self-exploring on the topic of art and creativity, and it's helped me in map making. So I think part of the answer is that curiosity. Don't go crazy and get distracted and not graduate, but do follow these things. For me personally, if I'm irritated by something, that's a sign I need to look at it more closely. For me personally, you may be different, you may be more open-minded. But for me, I use that Midwestern show me attitude as an indicator. Oh, it's sending that signal off. I probably need to look into art a little bit more and understand it, because all these other people seem to be very successful making maps that are artful and informational. Does that kind of answer?
Thank you.
That's a great question. Yeah, this is pretty transferable. And that's what I enjoy about it. I think a lot of if I have any career success at Esri, is because I think I'm known as someone who will make the effort to understand something and try to add that to our project or program, bring people in, be inclusive. And it's only because I've been taught by other people. I wasn't born this way, that's for sure. But I'm able to apply these things because it seems to work. And when it doesn't work, I'm totally willing to just pull myself out of a project, put someone else in. Maybe it's me. Maybe the person doesn't like me. No problem. We've got this other person, and if they burn through that person, okay, I'm going to give you one more try, and then it's you, right? I mean, let's be practical, right? So we're always open to that.
From an educator's perspective, I would just love to hear, after listening to your whole talk, what are the 3 skills that you want us to teach in a spatial thinking / GIS class? And specifically, I teach GIS in business. If you have some idea about that, you would be happy.
What are the 3 skills I would recommend you all teach in terms of spatial thinking?
What do you think are the 3 most
The 3?
or
Wow.
maybe 5, whatever you think.
Well, there's my 5, but I think the 3 are: do not wait for permission, do not be arrogant, it'll be used against you when you're young, trust me, and see through your own biases as quickly as your maturity allows you to do that. Because the sooner you can get over yourself, the sooner you're going to turn on to Charlie's perspective or Jim's perspective or someone else's perspective. And you're not doing it because you're a great guy or a great gal. You're doing it because you're trying to get the job done. You're trying to be a better contributor by understanding others for where they're at, not where you wish they would be. The good thing about doing project work for Esri, we're always about, let's get on it. Enough talky-de-talk. Let's get on it. When's the prototype going to be ready? Like, diagrams are great, PowerPoints are great. Where's the demo? And as soon as we can see that demo, the BS starts to go away, doesn't it, right? The theory starts to go away. Now we're dealing with reality. We got to make this work. And we need certain, we look for people who can get it done,
bring humility and openness. If there's a fourth thing, it's not really a skill, it's just a mentality. Show up on day one ready to be of service. Right? To be of service to someone is a great gift. A servant mentality. I'm here to help. You may be the biggest expert in writing JavaScript code that ever walked through the door, and I will love that. But we got to be able to talk, right? We got to be able to relate to one another. And we want to integrate young people. We want to integrate diverse thinking. And if ever there's a company that can get that done, it's Esri. It's pretty open to these things. I've seen some really incredible things in my time. So I very much enjoy that. I try to foster it. So that's what I would share back is you walk in the door with that, or you're willing to get there. We are people who are willing to help you get there. And there are opportunities, that's for sure. I think I'm between you and a beer, so I don't want to stop anybody from. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Abhijit. Appreciate it.
Keep you here just for a second. We have a